This sitting is resumed. I member for Christ yourself.
I'm obliged to you, Your Honor. I know that today is Friday, and we will all acknowledge a collective desire to enter the weekend soon.
Soon is very relative, I remember.
Sooner than you think, sir. Admittedly, this is a speech that I hoped I would not have had to make, although I will confess that I expected that I would have to make it when I observed the trajectory of the government in recent times, its attitude towards the law and to legislation, of course, and its attitude towards the people. As did the learned Attorney General, my major focus will be on the bill that deals with phone tapping, and I agree with him that wiretapping may be misleading, since he may confess now, and he has confessed to the people of Barbados, that they are less interested in old methods and are now more interested in the modern methods of breaching people's right to privacy, which is, as he said, protected by the Constitution. But the learned Attorney General also says to us that today this bill, which intends to be an act, will be an exception to the Constitution pursuant to Section 49, and that not even the Constitution will stop this government from invading against the rights of the citizens to privacy. As always, I like to write notes while listening and preparing the legislation, and the learned Attorney General described what he does today as a bold step. And he says that the legislation now trespasses on an area, I'm reading, sir, my notes that is, on an area that is sacred and murky. Perhaps it is the first time I've heard those two words put together in a sentence. I don't know how it is sacred and also murky. But if he were to ask the citizens of Barbados to choose one of those words, they would say back to him that it is murky. What the government is doing takes this country into somewhat murky waters. Making my notes further, and this is how I like to begin, by taking note of what was said in the opening speech. The learned Attorney General said that we have accused the government of being soft on crime. And his proof, the Honourable member's proof, that the government has not been soft on crime is that the government has passed a large quantity of legislation. Now, the learned Attorney General will be reminded that when we accuse the government of being soft on crime, we are speaking of qualities and not quantities. It is quite possible to pass lots of legislation, but the nature and the depth of that legislation must reveal an intention to arrest criminality. And I don't think the public is yet convinced that the government is serious about any effort to curb crime and to curb violent crime in this country. We normally hear the speeches about the appointment of many judges and making the Department of the Director of Public Prosecutions a lot larger. These days, I don't hear too often the boast about the New Bail Act. That New Bail Act, and I speak about this often, and I'm going to speak about it again today. That New Bail Act was supposed to change a situation in which young men on bail for murder are committing murders while on bail. Now, the Honourable Member for St. Joseph did not produce any statistics, but since that act has been passed, there have been more murders per month and per capita in Barbados. So that when we accuse the government of being soft on crime, we speak to qualities. And when one considers that the murders have continued, and not only continued, but that they have increased, it must be considered that the passage of the New Bail Act has been a failure if its intent was to incarcerate men who had been charged for one murder and to keep them incarcerated. But the situation continues in Barbados where men, according to the evidence, are committing murders, and then it is discovered that they are on bail for murder. If that is not evidence of failure, I don't know what is. But the learned Attorney General comes today and he says that this new legislation, the Intersection of Communications Bill, is an arsenal. That's how he describes it, as an arsenal. Now, an arsenal is a place where you keep weapons. And so the language is appropriate because we're going to take the position today that this legislation is a weapon against the people of Barbados. And that is in keeping with government's trajectory, and that is in keeping with government's relationship to the majority of people in this country, that the government has been unfair to the people of Barbados. The government has been treating the majority, who are honest and upright people, and those persons in Barbados now feel under threat. They certainly felt under threat when the government attempted to pass the cybercrime bill. Every day you're hearing people speak of the threat that they feel from government with this tint legislation, and it is not taken lightly. People leave home every morning now wondering if the police officer will stop them, what will be the consequence of being stopped, if they can take the time to go to the technician, so that it is not only money, but it is time, and it is time loss, and it is about productivity, and it is about bringing ruin to your entire day simply because government has somehow, by some perverse logic, associated dark tint on windows with violent crime. They haven't proved yet by any evidence how the government argues that there is a relationship between tint on a car window and violent crime. So that the point is that we agree with the Attorney General that government has an arsenal, not of tools. If it were tools, it would not be an arsenal. An arsenal contains weapons, and the people of Barbados feel that every piece of legislation now, and almost every policy, represents a weapon against the rights and interests of people in Barbados. I've referred to tint. There's the cybercrime bill, which government may be feeling embarrassed, has chosen to hide away for the time being. But that cybercrime bill, people felt that it was a threat to their rights. One of the least among them had said at the time of the bill that it was there to protect ministers. And I don't know if that is the reason government has hidden away the legislation. But you see, there's a trend, there's a trajectory. These pieces of legislation reveal government's propensity to go against the people of Barbados rather than going against the criminal element. So that today is just another one of those weapons being used against the people of Barbados. Now, we all know about the literary character Don Quixote. He used to tilt at windmills. He would see a windmill, and in his imagination, that windmill was a giant, large giant. And he would tell himself, look, I am going to beat that giant. But it was just a windmill. Now, I make that analogy with the Attorney General speaking in relation to the police service. And somehow he manages to reason that there are those in the opposition, certainly, according to him, and others, who want to hobble the police force, the police service, beg your pardon. And that is the tilt, I beg your pardon, not tint. That is the tilt at windmills. That is an argument invented conveniently. Nobody in Barbados wants to hobble the police service. In fact, I correct myself, if there's anybody in Barbados that wants to hobble the police service, it is the government. The government has not been kind to the police service. The government has not been fair to the police service. And indeed, the government has been interfering, and we've said this often, the government has been interfering in the work and the operations of the police service, and we say that based on the evidence. Whether some Good Fridays become Bad Fridays or not, the evidence is there that this government has undermined, hobbled, to use the word of the learned Attorney General, the police service. And when we hear self-congratulation, and I know this is a debate that stretches across all four pieces of legislation today, when we hear self-congratulation about inducting special constables into the police service, I confess that one of the expectations I had today was that I was coming here to hear government applaud itself in relation to the senior constables, men who have served for 20, 30, and 40 years and are still constables, men who received the promise since March last year from this compassionate government that a man who served 20 or 30 or 40 years, and 20 at least, in the service, in the police service, without promotion, that he would have been promoted, and that promotion and consequent increase in salary would have taken place since last year, March 2024. This is August 2025. And it has not happened, so that if anyone has hobbled the police service, it is the government. There are several police officers in this country, in this service, who are in a state of discontent. Not discontent with the people of Barbados, but discontent with the government. And so that is why I said the Attorney General, the learned Attorney General, must now be seen as tilting at windmills in creating this argument about people hobbling a police force, a police service, when the evidence reveals that it is the government that is hobbling the police service. I repeat that I thought I was coming here today to hear that the government was promoting constables of 20 years or more to the status, to the rank of senior constable, and increasing their salaries. They were told this, I repeat, for emphasis, they were told this last year, March, on the occasion of the St. James North by-election, and the pun is intended when I say by, in relation to the election. They were promised promotion again, And they were promised that they would have been promoted in May and June and July and August. And I honestly felt that our convergence here today was to formalize the promotion of those gentlemen and ladies who are in the police service. I thought that we were coming here to do that. The promise to them continues to be breached. Who then, Your Honor, is hobbling the police service? I may have made a decision to ignore the comment about the National Advisory, something the government set up, the National Advisory Council on Citizen Security. I raised the point of order on it. I don't know that the country needs to hear any prolonged contest on that. The newspapers recently disclosed to the country that the chairman retired. I don't know how many meetings they've had. The Learned Attorney General comes here today and says to Barbados that they held consultations with the public. I don't know where they held them. I suspect the public does not know where those meetings were held. I saw one photograph of them sitting at a place, it looks like a Laro court. One of them was unable to duck before the camera flash went off. So there he was staring ahead. I am not aware that that advisory council has met. And in those circumstances, the credit of the Attorney General must now stand on slippery ground. To come here today, having ignored the Bar Association, having ignored all of the interest groups in Barbados, and to say that there was consultation with something called a National Advisory Council on Citizen Security, to justify legislation by claiming that you consulted with that body of dubious standing and dubious authority, and one wonders whether it exists at all. And with the departure of the appointed chairperson, I wonder if the Learned Attorney General will tell this Parliament who is the chairperson of that dubious body, which probably does not exist. So that if you try to justify legislation on the basis of consultation with a body which probably does not exist, then that speaks more about the content and the motive behind this legislation than it says anything about the body itself. So that having summarized what the Learned Attorney General said, let us come to the content of our submission today. And tapping people's phones, I'm going to speak in plain language. Tapping people's phones is not a good thing. And there's a space in every person's life, in every person's existence, that is sacred. And I think that's the term, that's the word the Learned Attorney General used as well. That space that is sacred, it's called privacy. And whether it pertains to a personal relationship, and let us be frank, whether a personal sexual relationship, it could be a relationship with someone at church, at a club, but whatever is contained within that space of privacy, I don't think there's anything in human existence that is cherished more than that space called privacy, even sometimes more than money. Privacy, private relationships, personal relationships. That is indeed sacred and cherished space within one's existence. And a lot of that privacy finds expression by telephone. You are aware, sir, that when people retire, and, well, not by experience, because you're not retired, nor am I, but we watch our parents when we have them, and they spend a lot of time on the phone. And they do that as an expression of sometimes loneliness. They want to make contact with their friends who are still alive. But that is private space, time spent on a phone. Nobody writes letters these days, and if you write a letter, it is done by WhatsApp. And I'm going to say something about WhatsApp as well, because I can guarantee you, sir, that the overwhelming majority of Barbadians have abandoned the regular line on their cell phone, and they only speak by WhatsApp. And that is a statement in a lack of trust in somebody or some persons, that sacred space called privacy has been breached by some person or some persons. And people in Barbados believe, and I'm saying this to the government, people in Barbados believe that the government is actively involved in tapping telephone calls. People believe that. And it is not to offend, it is not to confront the government with offensive material or offensive statements. But I know the government knows this, because even members of the government have restricted themselves to WhatsApp calls and to WhatsApp messages. Well, it may distress Barbadians today to hear that by this legislation, which expresses a certain tyranny, that the technology is available to decode what we were being told was this thing called encryption. And everybody, in preserving their privacy, in locating themselves in that space called privacy, everyone was very happy to hear about this WhatsApp thing, and it's encrypted, and no one can breach it. Well, today, the people of Barbados will learn, not from me, but the people of Barbados will learn from a government that confesses. And I suspect there will be speeches after this, and I will ask anyone who speaks after me to dare to be honest enough with the people of Barbados and tell them that the technology is available to breach WhatsApp codes, this concept of encryption, and that is distressing, that is dangerous, and the whole discussion becomes very, very serious when we have abandoned regular lines over the last few years, and we have made resort to WhatsApp. And today we hear by any government member who confesses that WhatsApp can be decoded by the order of the government, so that the citizens of this country have lost that sacred space called privacy. And the citizens of this country will now understand that the government intends to do what others say they have been doing for a long time. I'm going to be very brutally frank in here today, because this is a very serious matter. That they will discover that not only have they lost that WhatsApp luxury, but that today's legislation will formalize the government's intrusion into private spaces. And I don't wish to target anyone, but I said it before and I'll say it again. There may yet be another speaker in here today who will confess that he or she uses WhatsApp, and that he or she uses WhatsApp because he or she is afraid of the distinct possibility that he or she is subject to invasion of privacy by the way of telephone calls. This is a very serious thing. We all leave here today, this Parliament, and we all leave this Parliament, all 30 of us, with the realization that we too may be victims. And I challenge the government and its members here today to deny that any of them, or to deny that all of them use the regular lines 100% of the time. I make bold to say that every member of this government has joined the majority of the citizens in Barbados in abandoning the regular line and in using WhatsApp. And I know that the majority of people in Barbados, the overwhelming majority of people in Barbados, are using WhatsApp. And why are they using WhatsApp? Just like the members of this government who use WhatsApp, they are using it because of a fear, an active and daily fear that their privacy is being invaded. And they have rested on the belief that WhatsApp has been impregnable, that WhatsApp is safe. It distresses me considerably, and it must distress all of us in this country, including members of this government, that the technology is there to expose us, our private lives. Now, the learned Attorney General advised that we can take comfort in the fact that we don't commit any of the crimes listed in this legislation, and that we don't commit any crimes at all. But that is not a consolation. The right to a private space is not conditional on the fact that one does not commit crime. There is no necessary relationship between privacy, between the right to privacy and the absence of crime in one's life. It is a moral space. It is a space to which one is entitled, even without the element of crime existing in one's life. And that is why it is mentioned in the Constitution. And as the learned Attorney General correctly said, that is why it is mentioned in the Constitution. And the Caribbean Court of Justice has said, contrary to earlier legal belief, that it was not justiciable. And all that means is that previously it was felt that you could not go to court to assert your right to privacy. The Caribbean Court of Justice has ruled that you can go to court. Further to the constitutional statement, guarantee of a right to privacy. You can go to court and have your right to privacy enforced. So that is how serious is the right to privacy. That is how serious is the right to pick up your telephone, whether by regular line or WhatsApp, and have a private conversation. And as I've said before, that right exists independent of the possibility that one may be involved in crime. The two are not related. Logically, they're not related. I could take up my phone at any time of day or night, being distant from criminality, and enjoy that right. And that is why the citizens of this country feel so strongly about it. But there's a trend. There's a trend of governmental legislation. There's a trend of governmental intrusion into the lives of people. Cybercrime, tint, and now today becomes an admission of the possibility, and beyond the possibility, the probability that there are people in this country and possibly in this Parliament, and I will confess my own belief that my phone has been subject for a long time to invasions against my privacy. The fact that I'm involved in crime doesn't console me. What disturbs me is that private space has been violated. and I'm just another citizen. And there are other citizens out there who are entitled to feel that violation. The realization that on this day in August 2025, there is a facility, or there are facilities, which on a daily or nightly basis is subjecting the people of this country to surveillance. Now, if that surveillance relates to a suspicion that persons may be involved in crime, I think most of us will justify it. I think most of us will justify it, as the learned Attorney General said. We have, by some means, to curb this violence. But one suspects that the activity has moved itself beyond suspicion of involvement in crime, and we come to the issue today that this surveillance relates itself to political activity. That this surveillance relates itself to political opinion, and that this government has an almost pathological preoccupation with seeking to discover where everyone in this country stands politically. That even the right to hold a political opinion, even the right to hold a political opinion puts one at risk. That's the reality in this country. That is the reality. And I'm going to say this, Your Honor. It is my belief, having heard the admission as to cybercrime was, according to one of them, was there to protect ministers, and that is a part of the record now. That cannot be denied. Cybercrime was there to protect ministers, to protect the government. We are not quite sure what tint is about, except that, again, it is an intrusion. Because if you ask a man to remove his curtains, and removing tint is equivalent to removing curtains on your house, that relates itself to a breach of privacy. And that is a part of the syndrome, the trend of governments in stripping people. Under cybercrime, I strip you of your right in your private circumstances to express yourself. Whether it is on Facebook or WhatsApp, I strip you of that right as a government. Under the tint legislation, I strip you of your right to be private, even in your vehicle. And I said before, the people in Barbados are with me on this, that there has been no proof, widespread proof of a relationship between tint and violent crime. But here is this trend in which governmental legislation in this place is about stripping people of the right to privacy, and privacy is related to dignity. And when you strip a man or a woman of his or her right to privacy, you have deprived that person of the right to a dignified existence. And then we come to this. And we must feel distressed. We must feel, as a population, the people must now feel endangered. That even, Your Honor, a private conversation is no longer sacred. A private conversation is no longer dignified. A private conversation now becomes subject to this constant surveillance, and we learn from reading the legislation that this surveillance may continue for up to 120 days, and that 120 days may be renewed. I would think that well within 120 days, you know who the criminals are. And I will never accuse anyone, not even in this parliament, of being involved in crime. But no one whose life connects to crime deserves that kind of treatment. No one. If the police have the evidence, the police service has the evidence, pursue it. And that is this party's position, that we support the power of the police service in conjunction with the high judiciary, and I say the high judiciary, to administer a system of surveillance, even by telephone. But when there is legislative condemnation of political involvement in the process, then we, the citizens of this country, the right-thinking and freedom-loving citizens of this country, must reject the system. And that is where, Your Honor, I come to the legislation itself. This legislation is dangerous. And the dangerous portion of this legislation was largely neglected or ignored this morning in the learned Attorney General's lengthy submission. The learned Attorney General spoke as to the process of interception, and I'm not going to repeat it, merely to summarize that we know that by this legislation, and we say this by way of educating the public of Barbados, that there will be 2 authorized officers who will manage, and that is to say actively manage, the process of telephone tapping of telephones. That's the Commissioner of Police and the Director General of an anti-terrorism unit. And that is logical. That makes some sense, because the police and anyone responsible for anti-terrorism, it is logical that they should combine themselves, although there was some question asked as to why, of those 2 authorized officers, only the Commissioner of Police would be the one to make the report to this independent monitoring commission. But I think the answer would be that the Commissioner of Police has a lot of resources, human resources at his disposal, and securing reports for submission to a commission would be easier within his grasp. There are a lot of questions that one may ask about the process. It's been dealt with before. I think the public now knows that those 2 officers actively conduct the process of surveillance, phone tapping, and they can do it with a warrant from a high court, or they can do it if they believe that national security is at risk, economic well-being is at risk. It is a judgment that they make. And to be honest, Your Honor, I believe in the principle that you have to have some trust and confidence in your military services. You must have it. For the sake of peace and good order in a country, the citizens must invest trust and confidence in their military forces. If you don't, that is chaos. If you don't believe, if you leave home believing that the society has military protection, which is what the state is about, the integrity of the state is about the state's sovereign right to exercise military power. That is at the heart of state power, the exercise of military power. And so if you live with the belief that that power, that military power within the state should not exist, then I'm sorry, you live in a place in which you accept anarchy. So that right-thinking citizens normally accept the legitimate place and power and function of a police service and a Barbados Defense Force. And that is something we have to, that is a mindset that we must have confidence and faith in our military services. And so when they exercise judgments, we want to believe that those judgments are well exercised. And we will believe that those judgments are well exercised when they are exercised independently of any influence. When the Prevention of Corruption bill came to this house, I think about 3 years ago, it was during COVID, we were at the Worthing location. My speech is there. And I said in my speech that the public is developing an abiding distrust in politicians, and that we must do a lot to restore that trust in us as a political group. And I wonder how much we've done to advance public trust in us as politicians. The comments are so cynical, sir. Every day you hear the comments and you begin to wonder if the political pursuit is in vain. Why are you doing this? And if you express that you do it for the good of a country, and for the good of a country which did good by you, a country to which you owe so much, and that you choose to engage in this pursuit for the further advancement of a country that has done so much for you, a small country. And I don't want to resort to cliches, but a country with so little that has managed to do so much for its citizens. And I don't have to go back to the history of this country, sir. This country has done so much good by its citizens. And a lot of that good has been through the political pursuits. I've made that speech before, I need not repeat it today. So much good has been done by this country through the political pursuits. And if trade unionism is political, then trade unions as well have done so much good for this country. And if I look around the 30 human beings who constitute this parliament, that's the evidence. That's the evidence as to how much good this country has done for the majority, because all of us in here, I think, emerge from that majority population, which historically has been the disadvantaged part of the population. And yet, there's a crisis in confidence. But some of us persist, Your Honor. Some of us persist. But today is not a good day. If the people of Barbados want to continue to feel invested in our political system, this is not a good day for the political system. This is not a good day for democracy in this country. This is not a good day when people will begin to believe that a government is itself infringing on a sacred right, not merely to suppress criminal activity, but to identify political adversaries. And I have to be honest with you, sir. And this statement is based on history. The history of the emergence of dictatorial regimes. This is how dictatorial regimes are born. I know people will be upset and people will be disappointed. But this must be said. I wasn't sent here today by Dale Carnegie to win friends. I come here to speak the truth, you know. I come here to speak the truth. And it is legislation like this that evidences the birth of dictatorial regimes, when people's private conversations, when people's private opinions cannot be held and cannot be held freely. especially when there are political opinions. This legislation today, according to my submission, sir, travels beyond crime. This legislation travels into the sacred area of political opinion and the right to political opinion and the right to freedom of association and the right to freedom of assembly. Whether it is a church or a political party or trade union, it is a sacred right which must be protected by this government, because the Constitution already says we have that protection. But today, we come to change the Constitution by this legislation. And the reason this government must change the legislation, must change the Constitution, I beg your pardon, is because this government recognizes today that this is an amendment which trespasses on sacred private property. And that sacred private property is called privacy. Your Honor, it is my solemn view and my belief that today's legislation is about a government advancing against the political rights and interests and entitlements of people within this population, whether they intend to vote or not. This legislation has the capacity today and hereafter to identify people, tag them and target them, either for political favor or political disfavor. This is where we are today. Is it a happy day? Well, let me demonstrate to you, Your Honor, why this is such an unhappy day. We were talking about the process by which you may tap a person's phone, a person's telephone, that it is done by the commissioner and the director general who is responsible for anti-terrorism, and they go to the High Court and they receive the High Court's condemnation for the activity. All well and good. But I accuse the learned Attorney General of having conspicuously avoided contact with Part 4 of this legislation. Part 4 of this legislation speaks of an independent monitoring commission. And the public will need to hear what is this independent monitoring commission. I've spoken to the two authorized persons, or the two persons authorized to administer this legislation, and more directly to administer phone tapping, because we need to speak clearly to the people of Barbados that today is the official start of the acknowledgement of something that has been happening in this country for a while. We know that. And if it were not so, high-ranking officials in this country would not have been restricting themselves to WhatsApp, and I'm going to say the other one, to Signal. People are finding all creative means to avoid the traditional means of communication, the traditional modes of communication. And they're doing that, I repeat, because of a fear that government and its surrogates are actively engaged in breaching their right to privacy. This government has come here today to formalize the breaching of that right to privacy, and that right to privacy has been breached for a long, long time in this country. You don't have to be Oinatha, or you don't have to be reminded of Oinatha's voice in relation to something that is suspected. Who wants to get angry with me? Be angry. I have a public responsibility. I have a public moral and political responsibility to justify my presence here. And I don't sit on a cushion of lies. Let the truth set us all free. And so, I repeat, Your Honor, the position we take is that in an environment where crime, to use the learned Attorney General's words, where crime has become so sophisticated, it must be fought with sophisticated weapons. And maybe, just maybe, phone tapping is a sophisticated weapon against crime. Against crime. And the Commissioner of Police is responsible for crime. And that is why the legislation identifies him as the authorized officer to deal with phone tapping. And they add the Director General for Anti-Terrorism, and we are fine with that. And condonation by the High Court, we are fine with that. But there is no place in this system for a politician. No politician, from the most junior to the most senior, can sit in any position of supervision, of superiority, of administration, when that system is intended to provide surveillance over everyone, including the most senior politician to the most junior. What is the business of a politician in this? There's no business. As I said, Your Honor, we have to trust our military forces. Our military forces will never be perfect. Being humankind, they will never be perfect, but we have to trust our military services. And there are some of us who do. But we cease to trust our military services when they become contaminated by political involvement, political contamination, I say, because there are many politicians whose sole interest is perpetual power. And some politicians believe that you can travel the road to perpetual power only when you suppress freedom and democracy. And this legislation is one of the means by which you may suppress the right of the individual and the right of the collective to freedom of expression, freedom of political opinion, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, all of his freedoms that are acknowledged by the Constitution may be violated by what comes to this Parliament today. The intersection. I want to read the title. Intersection of Communications Bill. I've spoken as to the involvement, the undue involvement of politicians. And that is not a mere speech, because this legislation reflects that it is intended that politicians will continue to be involved in police work. The intersection of communications is a police job. It is there to suppress and to prevent those offenses at the first schedule: murder, treason, trafficking, kidnapping, money laundering, the drugs offenses, offenses under the Prevention of Corruption Act, which is an offense pertaining to politicians and public figures. And if the legislation, beg your pardon, sir, aims to prevent offenses among politicians and public figures, how do politicians and public figures become part of the administration of this legislation, of this system? How do they become that? Are there judges in their own cause? That is a breach of the principle of natural justice. A man cannot be a judge in his own cause, and he cannot be a judge for his own cause. A politician must not be present within this system, sir. Must not be. And how dare this legislation at Section 25, I believe it is. Yes, Section 25 establishes, well, let us say Part 4, establishes something called an independent monitoring commission. And the learned Attorney General was suspiciously brief, if not silent, on this portion of the legislation, which begins at page 31. Let the public know that this legislation becomes extremely dangerous at page 31, part 4. Let me read it, sir. Establishment of Independent Monitoring Commission. Section 25(1). There is established a commission to be known as the Independent Monitoring Commission, and that word independent will become important. What are the functions and powers of the commission? Here are they, sir. At section 26, the commission, and look, I am quoting the sections, Your Honor, because I want the people of Barbados to get hold of this legislation. I want them to read it. It's written in English. The commission shall be responsible generally for the monitoring and supervision of the intersection of communications to ensure that such intersection is conducted in accordance with this act. Do you hear that, sir? The Independent Monitoring Commission is responsible generally for monitoring and supervision of intersection. It means that all intersections, all instances of phone tapping in Barbados will be under the monitoring and the supervision of something called an Independent Monitoring Commission. That sounds good. But it ceases to be good when one considers how that commission is constituted. And this is the section of the act in which the word minister starts to appear. It is my submission, sir, it is my contention, previously and still held, that there is no place in this legislation for a minister. None of us, as I've said, under the Prevention of Corruption debate in this Parliament 3 or 4 years ago, whenever it was, none of us can stand or sit beyond public suspicion as to unwholesome involvement. And one by one, we can put our hands up and say, I'm clean. I do not protest my innocence. But whatever we think of ourselves, whatever is our opinion of self, the public is entitled to their beliefs about a system that is quite often in crisis, a crisis of public confidence, loss of public confidence. And if there's that loss of public confidence, and if we want to guarantee to the public that political offices remain free of involvement unwholesomely, then we as politicians, we as political administrators, must have the individual and collective self-confidence to say to the people of Barbados, those are police matters. Let the police deal with it. We have countries, we have democracies in this world. I don't come to praise other democracies, but there's a fairly large democracy in this world in which the head of state, the president, is investigated by a Department of Justice. Now, whatever criticisms are made of that country, that is beautiful democracy. And this is hideous democracy. When politicians leave their perches and decide that they wish to be involved in every institution, every system must have their presence. Is that insecurity or is that fear? Or is that an unwillingness to allow democracy to function in a country? I repeat, there is no place for a politician under this legislation. But yet, here's this creature called an Independent Monitoring Commission, which supervises and monitors all instances of phone tapping in this country. And here's a politician involved in the process. And how is that politician involved in the process, Your Honor? The second schedule. I know there's going to be argument about how the judiciary is appointed. the judiciary has many, many tasks. They will tell you that there's political involvement in judicial appointment. But when a person becomes a judge, that person deals with so many cases that do not touch on concern political activity. Wiretapping is specific and it is dangerous. And it must be at every level, even at the level of appointment of an independent monitoring commission, it must be insulated from political involvement and more so political control. Here is how the members of that commission, a small commission of 3 persons, are appointed. Now, it says the 3 commissioners, one of whom is to be a retired judge, the other a member of civil society, and a person nominated by the minister. Now, all three are appointed by the minister in relation not to broad judicial matters from family law back to company law, criminal law. This is a specific activity pertaining to the single activity of phone tapping. Phone tapping, and that phone tapping may extend to every one of the 30 of us who have the privilege and the honor to come in here and describe ourselves as honorable members. We are not above it. We are not above the scrutiny and the surveillance of a system of phone tapping if it is felt that we may be involved in any of the offenses mentioned at Schedule 1, including corruption. Why then must someone under this act, referred to as a minister, be given the power and the authority to choose those 3 persons? Is that not control? Is that not control? And the control deepens itself when it says that the minister shall determine how much they're paid. That is control. That is control. And we have argued previously, and we will continue to argue, that the president of this Republican state is given the power to appoint 7 senators. Why can't the president be given equal power to appoint 3 members of a commission as serious as this? A commission that goes to the very heart of the democracy that we have known. And I said earlier this year, show me a democracy and I'll show you a tyranny in the making. This is tyranny in the making, Your Honor. This is tyranny in the making, when something as sacred as a telephone call cannot be made with privacy. And that this legislation says that for the period of 120 days, 2 gentlemen or 2 ladies, whoever they are, I don't care who they are, don't care about the gender, that 2 persons shall be given the power to conduct that exercise of surveillance and scrutiny over 120 consecutive days. And a body of 3 persons will supervise them. And that body is appointed by a minister. A minister. And I'm going to say something now that we all must know. Who is the minister? I will let the public guess. I will let the public guess as to the minister or the personage that this legislation allows to be concealed behind the nomenclature minister. We all can guess who it would be within this system that is being established. The point I make, Your Honor, is that this system of phone tapping exists ultimately under the control and the influence of a politician. called in this act a minister. And the public can guess as to which minister it is. I've not come here for personal assault on anyone. I have come to attack a system that infringes against freedom, personal freedom in this country. That is what we must resist. That is what decent people in Barbados must resist. And people in Barbados must extricate themselves out of those cocoons of fear, because it is fear that makes us run to WhatsApp and the other systems of encryption until we discover that encryption can be decoded. The technology that created encryption is now subject to a superior technology that can decode that encryption. So all of us who live within those cocoons of comfort are now cast into the cocoons, back into the other cocoon of fear, where people in this country are justified, perhaps, in their reluctance to express even a political opinion in the privacy of a telephone call. People are whispering. People are avoiding conversations. People are saying, I will say it to you only if I see you. And if I don't see you, I can't say it. That is the country in which we are now existing. How did we get to this point? How did we reach this point of fear? This legislation gives justification to that fear. And you would have thought that a government would have come to this parliament today with legislation to erase that fear and to genuinely target a criminal element by this legislation. Just as we felt that the government would have come here and passed a new bail act that would have prevented recidivistic, murderous acts in this country, and it has failed to do it. Just as we had hoped that a government would not bring a cybercrime bill to criminalize and to impose massive financial fines on people simply for making a meme. And just as we were hoping over the last 3-4 months that government would not carry out a threat to penalize people for having dark windows, privacy again, just as we had those hopes have been defeated today by a government that is insistent and persistent and that continues to show us the road to dictatorship. And if no one in this country believes that we are on the road to dictatorship, read this legislation. Anyone can take offense, political or personal offense, it matters not to me. I read English. And I live in this country. And I know the kinds of conversations I have with people every day. That people are asking for an extrication from an environment which is oppressive. We are not doing well in this country, sir. We are not doing well in this country. And I'm not restricting my argument to our material well-being. There's a spiritual darkness. People feel defeated. People feel a lack of freedom. People feel that there's a need to breathe anew and to breathe afresh. And when we hope that we can breathe anew and breathe afresh, along comes legislation like this. We were so happy when the cybercrime bill was put on the shelf. We were really happy. And apart from being happy, we were hopeful that the think legislation would not come, and up to yesterday the threats are made that they're coming, and that they're coming on September 1st. This is the most dangerous of the three. And so I say to the learned Attorney General, it is not about quantities of legislation. It is about the quality of governmental conduct. The governmental conduct that shows that power must be reserved to this government in this country. And people wonder why I say what I will say now. Governmental discomfort reveals itself in a political environment and a political atmosphere in which you get a sense that government never really settles into office. And I can say to you, sir, that the dominant conversation in this country over the last 3 years, 3.5 now, has not been on developmental issues. It has been on when government will call the next election. That we have found ourselves as a country in a frame of mind in which we wake every day and people are asking, when will the government call the election? Because the people in this country believe that the government is more concerned with an election than it is with the country's welfare. And we live in a system in which the people of this country give the government 5 years. 5 years. And after 3, there's this restlessness, this discomfort, this governmental restlessness. Is it a government that is insecure? Is it a government that is never comfortable with its mandate? Is it a government that feels that it cannot govern and find public acceptance unless there's always that threat of an election looming over people's heads and making them restless and uncomfortable? It's not a good country to live in when there's that level of restlessness. And if the restlessness was never justified, today that restlessness is justified by the presence of this legislation in our lives. And I would hope, Your Honor, that just as the cybercrime bill seems to have disappeared, that this legislation must disappear. And I'm going to ask the people of Barbados to let their voices be heard in resistance to this. Because this is not about the few political parties we have around here. This is about every citizen who owns a cell phone. This is about every citizen who owns a landline telephone. And they number more and more significantly than any political party in this country. But I believe, Your Honor, that government in its quest to control every area of individual expression may now be in a very practical way afraid of who are those persons who oppose the government. Whether they do it by way of artistic expression, there are people who create videos, and I think you call them memes. These little videos, which in some countries have won elections, and just maybe this government has no intention to lose an election through social media. And this legislation will become a chance for the government to suppress freedom of expression in private spaces. WhatsApp. If a man or a woman has the power to send out 100 WhatsApp messages, 100 memes, and those 100 people can send to 100 people, that is power. That is political power. And is that the political power of which a government is afraid? And is that the political power that a government intends to snuff out by tapping people's phones and identifying them? And we all know, and the people of this country know, that this government is a government of transactions. And that there are people who express favor, and in exchange, they receive favor. And that is who many of us have become. That political thought and the integrity of political thought now suffers at the anvil of the transaction, the benefit. You can curse a government one day and praise them the next, and it does not disqualify you from receiving a favor. That's happening in Barbados, in broad daylight. And so the cause, the political cause, the philosophical moorings, the political thought in Barbados is not a risk of death, because the transaction has become people's mode of survival. It's a vulgar political world. And causes are dying. Causes are dying, sir. And if a cause is alive and it refuses to die, you can kill it with this legislation. You can say to that person, I defy you and I deny you the right to express a political opinion because I'm going to hear you, and hearing you, I will punish you. That is what this legislation is capable of doing. Show me a democracy and I will show you a tyranny in the making. Here is the tyranny revealing itself. Here is a politician having control over surveillance. Here's a politician having control over phone tapping in this country, by setting up a commission and calling it an independent commission when the evidence and the structural evidence makes it clear that there's nothing independent about it. And when you have the power to appoint them, you also, by this legislation, reserve unto yourself the right to give them the amount of money that you want to give them as their remuneration. That is control. You're dealing with human beings. And there was a case in which a judge said, men are not angels, and he included women. They're not angels. There's no perfection. But we wish for perfection in our military services. We wish for perfection at the very highest levels of government and governance. And that is why we repose trust and confidence in our high officials. But there are times when our high officials must not make themselves immune from the gaze, from the scrutiny of our military services. And there's only one person in this country. And let me drop the word person and say office. There's only one political office in this country that may be found acceptable in terms of appointment, since the office of president does not engage itself actively except in very, very few cases. But certainly in terms of the appointment of a body, a monitoring and a supervisory body as important as this, the people of this country must now receive the best legal advice that no one except the office of president must appoint this independent monitoring commission. And if it is not given to the office of president, it loses its right to call itself independent. And monies that are voted for this commission under this legislation are voted by this parliament. I say that ought to be amended, and the monies for this commission and for this system ought to be voted within the monies that are voted by this parliament for the police service, and not separately for this system. Again, evidence of parliamentary and political control. Who are we? We're just a parliament of 30 people. 30 fallible human beings. 30 people who must not ask the public to see us or any of us as above a system of scrutinizing telephone calls. It should not happen, but when it has to happen, no member of this parliament, and no member of the other place must be seen or must be placed above the system by being given the power to appoint. And we know that in these arrangements, the person who appoints hardly ever loses the right of access to the person whom he appoints. Hardly ever. Hardly ever. Who are these super people? Who is this super minister under this legislation who gives unto himself or herself the right to be involved in the appointment of a 3-person monitoring commission? And this is not about garbage collection or street lighting. This is about invading against a constitutional right to privacy. That is what this is about. This is about the possibility that a man or a woman may sacrifice an entire professional career because of an opinion that he gives. Because people have lost the right to elevation, professional elevation, in this country and in many countries because of a political opinion. Show me a democracy and I'll show you a tyranny in the making. This is the evidence today, sir. And this is the evidence of a government that intends to turn the vice grip in suppression of political freedoms in this country. This is evidence of that. No freedom-loving Barbadian can conscientiously today stand and give support to this legislation. It is dangerous, it is sinister, it is sinful, it is immoral. And Barbadians are encouraged to resist it, not by violence, but by righteous thought. And this government must be asked to return with this from whence it came. And in my view, it comes out of the bowels of tyrannical intent, a belief that you must hold a country in the palm of your hand and give dictate indefinitely. And while you intend to give dictate indefinitely, the people of this country say, give us our freedom. Give us our freedom, and we will only have that freedom if this legislation is reversed. The people of this country reverse cybercrime. The people of this country would love to reverse tint. Will this legislation be reversed? Will this legislation be reversed, sir? And if it is not, the very constitution that this legislation infringes today will become subject to even greater infringements. Today, this legislation, this government acknowledges and admits that it infringes against the right to privacy. This government admits that. When will they infringe the right to freedom of association? When will they reverse the right or infringe the right to freedom of expression, political opinion? These are all sacred rights, sir. This legislation today is capable of infringing against all those rights. Because those rights, Your Honor, begin with thought. And when thought transfigures itself into speech, and the speaker is identified as being a potential enemy of the government, a government may decide, you being our enemy must not survive. And that is the reality in a lot of countries. That is the reality in many countries, sir. That many people are imprisoned for their beliefs. Many people are imprisoned for their opinions. Many people are imprisoned for their speech, for their spoken and written speech. That is where we are today. We are on the threshold of that tyranny. We are on the threshold of that dictatorship. Can we and will we as a country take this specter, that is how I describe this legislation, this specter of tyranny, can we take it seriously? Or will we say, well, it is the government, and the government has the numbers, and the government has the power. And what will we do? Will we endure it? Or will we have the will? Will we have the political will? Will we have the political might to resist this? This is worthy, Your Honor, of resistance. I ask the people of this country to study this legislation, to take it seriously, to consider it for what it is worth, and it is worth nothing except a threat against all of their rights. And to consider that there is no invasion more sinister than an invasion against privacy. We understand that people will get hungry and invade the stores, the supermarkets, and steal. But that is theft of a material product. This represents theft and deprivation of the right to think and the right to turn those thoughts into conversation, and the right of a government to say, if you converse in that way, chances are you'll act in a way that we do not like, and that we will ensure that you will not survive politically. And it can become more dangerous. There are countries in which the government, an autocratic government, an authoritarian government, a despotic or dictatorial government will say, you will not have the right to exist at all. And sometimes they imprison, and sometimes they kill. Is that the road on which we are, sir? We've never seen it before. But the fact that we've never seen it before, Your Honor, does that indicate that we will never see it in this country? We've never seen the kind of crime in this country that we are seeing now. From where did it come? Barbadians are committing that crime. Never used to happen before, but it is happening now. And if that quality of crime can happen now in this country, are we going to have a government that is capable of doing what this legislation portends? And this legislation does not portend well for the people of this country. This is called a cognate debate, and I have no intention of allowing this sinister and dangerous legislation to be hidden away among legislation dealing with jurors and special constables. But a word for the special constables, sir. I have previously been petitioned by special constables for their induction fully into the police service. And today, I am pleased, and if I remember the number correctly, 46 out of 47, as stated by the Honourable Attorney General, will be inducted fully into the police service. And I'm therefore happy for those special constables. But I cannot express similar happiness for the continuing plight of a constable who has served 40 or 30 or 20 years, who after that time, and after many promises over the past few months, still cannot see the light of promotion, and certainly cannot see the light of increased pay. And all this is happening, and I will say it here, I've said it elsewhere, and I must take my privilege of being here to say it here, that while they continue to be disappointed by this government, further to its breach of promise to elevate them and to pay them, they are seeing colleagues who happen to dress differently receive not elevation, but elevated pay. Divide and rule, Your Honor. Divide and rule. And we claim, and this government claims, that it cares for the police service. I say to this government that for a long time, it lost the police service. It lost the support of the police service. It lost any comfortable relationship that a government ought to have with its police service. That is what I say to this government. It has lost it. And that relationship did not improve on that Good Friday. And indeed, that relationship worsened on that Good Friday and in the aftermath of that Good Friday. And what has the government done to retrieve a bad relationship? To elevate pay selectively, to elevate pay on the basis of the kind of clothes that you wear to the office. That is not fair treatment of a service. That is not a service by which you hope to achieve a good relationship. This government has lost the chance for a good relationship with the police service. And if that were not enough, I have been petitioned by members of the prison service. And if that were not enough, I've been petitioned by members of the teaching service. And if that were not enough, I have been petitioned by members of the nursing service. And there's widespread discontent in this country against this government. But if this government takes the position that resistance to my right to speak in here is to be constituted of personal invectives, so be it. I am impervious to that. The rights of the people of this country, the interests of the people of this country, the entitlements of the people of this country within the public service must not be sacrificed on an anvil of personal abuse. I will come here from week to week, and as I always say, I will scrutinize, analyze, criticize, and when needed, I will chastise. Today, in relation to this governmental quest to tap people's telephones, I have scrutinized it, and it is wrong. I have analyzed it, and it is wrong. I criticize it for its wrongdoing. And this government must now be chastised for taking this country into a regime of autocratic rule, where the citizen no longer has the right to express his thoughts freely, and that those thoughts must be scrutinized, that those thoughts must be subject to unfair surveillance by a government that pretends that it is interested in reversing criminal wrongdoing when its preoccupation, based on its experience and based on its performance, its preoccupation now concerns itself more with political survival, political success, political survival of the fittest. Let the people decide when the time comes who is politically more fit, who has stood on moral ground. Let the people decide that. The legislation in relation to the juries, let not this sinister bit of legislation conceal itself within legislation pertaining to juries. And I think the other legislation, firearms, the Firearms Act has been amended so often that as the firearms become more prevalent and more sophisticated, it will not be any surprise that from time to time a parliament will come here and amend legislation pertaining to firearms. I will end by quoting the learned Attorney General when he said, "The thousands who are law-abiding have nothing to fear." I reject that, sir. The thousands who are law-abiding do have a lot to fear. And they feared for a long time. And that is why, apart from the unsuspected and those who are indifferent, they still use the home phone, the landline. A few will still use the regular mobile phone line. But the majority, including the majority in here, use WhatsApp. And so the people of Barbados will now be told today, and if it is the final thing I say, I will say this: let the people of Barbados be aware that your precious WhatsApp calls and conversations can now be decoded by this government. And I say this government because it is my view that this government will continue to be involved in police work. And if this government is asking the people of this country to accept that they will set up something called an independent monitoring commission and that they will distance themselves from that commission, who they think they're fooling? Who they think they're fooling? You appoint 3 people. You set the salaries of the 3 people. You don't think you're going to call the people and say how things going? Let me know what happening. Who names you got down? You got down so-and-so. They think we born yesterday. They think that the average citizen does not know how humankind functions and the mind of humankind. You think the average citizen does not understand the words influence and control, and that when you appoint a man and set a man's salary, that you're likely to return to that man and seek an exchange of information against your political adversary. They think they're talking to fools. Well, the people in this country are not foolish. And they've endured cybercrime, and they are enduring and they're now asked to endure phone tapping. By this government's admission that this phone tapping is an infringement against a fundamental constitutional right. And this government comes here today to remove that fundamental constitutional right in favor of criminal investigation. But I say again, sir, it is not only about criminal investigation, it is about political inquiry against your adversaries. It is about further empowering yourself by knowing who is with you and who is against you. Well, there are few people, a minority of people in this country, who will associate themselves with a party openly because they're not afraid. But perhaps the majority are afraid. And the majority will probably only extricate themselves from that fear in a small cubicle called a polling booth. But for the time being, they will remain silent. And in the interim, they used to do the WhatsApp calls and the WhatsApp messages. This government now has the power to invade and to decode the WhatsApp messages. Let the people of Barbados understand that is where this country is. Let the people of Barbados understand that that is where this country is. And that this precious WhatsApp medium is no longer precious. That this government has the technology, the power to invade against WhatsApp. Where can you run to now, people of Barbados? Where will you run to? Will you meet and do the face-to-face? Your Honor, you have been kind and you have been patient. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Mr. Speaker,
Honourable Member for St. James Central.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I just rise to move that the House be suspended until, that the sitting be suspended until 20 minutes after 4.
The question is that this Honourable Chamber be suspended until 4:20 p.m. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This Honourable Chamber stands suspended until 4:20 p.m.